Elias Crane lived like a ghost in Raven Shade, a quiet man who blended into the background. But when shallow graves began surfacing in the forest he knew so well, his name would soon become synonymous with terror. What started as a single discovery of a body would unravel into one of the darkest hunts in the town's history, exposing a hidden serial killer who had been stalking the woods for nearly a decade. It began in late autumn, when the forest outside the town of Ravenshade stood eerily quiet under a blanket of mist. A group of hikers out for what was supposed to be a peaceful trek wandered off the beaten path in search of a shortcut back to the main road. The forest floor was damp, covered with rotting leaves and broken branches. That was when one of them noticed something unusual. Sticking out from the soil, what looked like a piece of plastic glinting faintly under the fading light. Curiosity turned into dread as they brushed away the dirt and uncovered what appeared to be a human hand, pale and lifeless. They ran back in panic, alerting the authorities, and within hours the forest was sealed off with flashing lights and yellow tape. Investigators arrived expecting perhaps a decades-old body, a tragic accident, or even an abandoned burial. What they discovered was far more disturbing. The body belonged to a young woman, not long dead, carefully wrapped in layers of thick plastic as though someone had wanted to preserve it. Her wrists were tightly bound with rope, tied in a way that seemed deliberate and practiced. There were no signs of animal interference, no suggestion of a random tragedy. This was a crime scene hidden in plain sight. The news spread quickly through Ravenshade, a town small enough that everyone knew one another's names, and fear began to seep into the community. Parents who once let their children roam freely now kept them indoors. Campers canceled their trips, and hunters avoided the woods. The forest, once a place of beauty and calm, now carried an air of menace. Police tried to calm the panic by assuring residents it could be an isolated case, perhaps connected to a domestic dispute or a passing stranger. But unease lingered, and whispers of something darker began to take hold. The investigators couldn't ignore the strange care taken with the body. Whoever had buried her hadn't been rushing. The grave was shallow but precise, placed where fallen branches might conceal it. The wrapping was too meticulous to be the work of someone acting in desperation. This wasn't random, it felt planned, almost ritualistic. Some officers speculated it might be the work of someone who had done this before. Others thought it could simply be a one-time act of brutality. But as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees and the cold night fell upon the forest, a chilling thought grew stronger among those working the scene. The killer might not be gone. He could still be out there, moving silently among the trees, watching as strangers uncovered his secret. The investigation quickly moved beyond the first grave. When detectives began cross-checking missing persons reports from the surrounding counties, they noticed a troubling pattern that no one had fully pieced together before. Over the past 5 years, several young women had disappeared near Ravenshade and its bordering towns. Their cases had been scattered across different jurisdictions, often dismissed as runaways or unsolved mysteries without clear evidence of foul play. Now, with the discovery in the forest, those unsolved disappearances suddenly carried a much darker weight. Authorities returned to the forest with a new urgency. Cadaver dogs were brought in, along with specialized teams equipped with ground-penetrating radar. Day after day, they searched areas far from public trails, focusing on hidden clearings and abandoned logging paths. The grim results confirmed their worst suspicions. More shallow graves were uncovered, each containing the remains of women who had gone missing. The bodies were always wrapped in heavy plastic, their wrists bound with rope tied in the same intricate knot. The careful, deliberate placement of the graves showed planning and consistency. This was not the work of chance. It was the signature of someone methodical and precise. The discovery of multiple victims shattered any illusion of safety. The forest was no longer just the backdrop of a tragic crime. It had become the hunting ground of a serial killer who had been hiding in plain sight for years. Reporters flooded the town, broadcasting live updates, while helicopters hovered over the thick tree canopy. Fear swept through Ravenshade, and the once quiet community now found itself at the center of national attention. Residents whispered about whether the killer might be someone they saw every day at the store, someone whose face they had grown used to over the years. For investigators, the mounting evidence revealed a terrifying possibility. The killer had likely been operating undetected for nearly a decade. The precision of the burials suggested someone with knowledge of the land, someone who knew how to avoid being seen and where to dig without drawing attention. The forest, dense and endless, had provided the perfect cover. With every new grave uncovered, the task force realized they were not only chasing a murderer, but also unraveling a hidden history of violence that had been unfolding right under their noses. And somewhere in the shadows of the trees, the one responsible might still be watching, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. Despite the mounting evidence, investigators had little to identify who the killer might be. The graves revealed patterns, but there were no fingerprints, no DNA traces, and no clear connections between the victims beyond their age and the way they were buried. The killer had been careful, almost obsessively so, erasing signs that could point to his identity. Still, detectives began to notice something curious. Every burial site was located near forgotten logging trails, paths that had been overgrown and unused for decades. These were not areas a casual visitor would stumble upon. They were deep, hidden places only someone familiar with the forest could navigate with such confidence. The theory began to take shape that the killer was local. Perhaps someone who worked in the forestry industry, or a hunter who knew the terrain better than anyone else. Detectives mapped the burial sites on a large board, connecting the locations with red string. When viewed together, the patterns seemed deliberate, as though the killer had chosen the sites with careful planning, forming a network of graves hidden within the forest's vast expanse. The sense of a phantom presence grew stronger. It was as if this person was always one step ahead, leaving behind nothing but the silence of the woods. The investigation hit a breakthrough when a hiker exploring the deeper parts of the forest stumbled upon a strange campsite. At first glance, it looked like a temporary shelter, a tarp stretched between trees, a fire pit made of stones. But buried beneath leaves and dirt were items that raised alarms, torn pieces of plastic similar to those found around the victims, lengths of rope, and old tools caked in soil. The campsite suggested that the killer had not only been using the forest as a dumping ground, but had also been living among the trees, blending in so seamlessly that search teams had never noticed. The discovery terrified the community further. If the killer was truly living in the woods, he could have been watching the investigation unfold from the shadows, tracking the movements of the police and the reporters. The idea of a predator hiding so close unsettled everyone. Detectives now faced a chilling reality. The killer was not some distant figure leaving behind cold cases. He was a phantom embedded within the very land they were trying to search. Each day that passed increased the fear that he was already preparing his next victim, hidden just beyond where the searchlights ended. Detectives knew they had to act quickly before another victim disappeared into the forest. The discovery of the hidden campsite confirmed their suspicion that the killer had been observing the investigation closely. This meant every move had to be calculated, every detail kept quiet, so as not to alert him. A task force was formed, bringing together local law enforcement, state investigators, and federal agents with experience in tracking elusive criminals. Their goal was simple but dangerous: lure the killer out of hiding and catch him before he vanished deeper into the woods. The first step was surveillance. Hidden cameras were set up along old trails and near the grave sites, disguised within trees and underbrush. Officers posed as campers in key areas of the forest, keeping fires lit at night to give the appearance of vulnerability. Motion sensors and drones provided constant coverage, feeding back hours of footage for review. For weeks, nothing surfaced. The forest remained quiet, almost too quiet, as if the killer knew he was being hunted. Some investigators feared he had already moved on, leaving Ravenshade behind, but others believed he was waiting, watching, choosing his next move carefully. The breakthrough came on a cold, moonless night. One of the cameras captured movement in an area long cleared by search teams. The footage showed a figure dressed in camouflage, carrying a large backpack and a hunting knife strapped to his belt. He moved silently, scanning the ground, pausing to inspect the soil as though searching for a place to dig. His familiarity with the land was evident. He walked paths invisible to the untrained eye, slipping between trees with practiced ease. It was clear that this was no random trespasser, it was the phantom they had been chasing. Using the footage, investigators traced the man's movements to a cabin tucked deep in the forest, a place so remote it barely appeared on maps. The cabin belonged to Elias Crane, a reclusive former forestry worker who had retired years earlier after an injury. Locals remembered him as quiet, someone who preferred isolation and rarely visited town. With enough evidence to warrant action, a raid was planned. Officers approached at dawn, surrounding the property in silence, weapons drawn. As the door was forced open, the cabin revealed a chilling scene. one that confirmed every fear about the man who had been using the forest not only as his hunting ground but as his sanctuary. 400 words long. Don't add any headings. Inside the cabin, investigators found themselves stepping into a nightmare frozen in time. The walls were lined with shelves covered in trinkets, earrings, watches, lockets, and even clothing carefully folded and labeled. Each item had once belonged to a victim, a grim collection of trophies kept as proof of his crimes. In the corner of the room stood a large corkboard plastered with forest maps, marked with red pins that corresponded to burial sites. Next to it lay journals filled with strange notes, sketches of knots, lists of dates, and cryptic phrases that hinted at his obsession with control and ritual. Every detail revealed that Elias Crane had been operating methodically for years, creating a hidden archive of his violence while the world outside went about unaware. Forensic teams combed through the cabin and unearthed evidence linking him directly to the murders. Strands of hair were sealed in jars, photographs of terrified faces were tucked away in drawers, and rolls of unused plastic wrap sat stacked like supplies for future victims. The sheer volume of material stunned investigators, making it clear that Crane had not been a man driven by impulse, but by a cold, calculated obsession. The forest had been more than just a hiding place. It was his domain, a personal graveyard where he could carry out his rituals without interruption. The arrest of Elias Crane shook Ravenshade to its core. Residents who had once passed him at the grocery store or seen him repairing fences now grappled with the horror of what he had been hiding. The man they thought was a harmless recluse had, in reality, been orchestrating a series of killings that stretched back nearly a decade. Court records would later reveal that Crane showed little emotion after his capture, speaking only when necessary, as if withholding the full scope of his actions was another form of control. Though his arrest brought relief, it also left behind an enduring scar. Families of the victims now had answers, but the weight of the truth was almost too much to bear. The peaceful image of Ravenshade was gone forever, replaced by the knowledge that beneath its quiet surface, a predator had thrived unnoticed. The forest that once represented beauty and escape would now always carry the shadow of what had been uncovered there. Elias Crane's crimes had turned it into a place of nightmares, a chilling reminder of how darkness can hide in the most ordinary places, waiting to be found.